Alright guys, welcome to Level Up Mechanics. My name is Chris and today I'm going to show you how I installed this Injen Evolution cold air intake system. It's a pretty simple install. Probably take you about 30 minutes or so to get it done from start to finish. And yeah, if you have any questions, don't forget to put them down in the comments below. But in the meantime, here we go. Alright, here's everything the Injen Evolution cold air intake system will come with. You're going to basically have a parts list, which will give you a rundown of everything that is included. You're also going to have your coupler that connects the pipe to the throttle body, some hardware, some weather stripping, some worm clamps, your air filter, mine is the oil option, the enclosed box that the filter sits in, and in addition to that, you're also going to have this intake extension piece that will sit on top of the radiator area, and that'll help draw cold air to the filter from the front grille of the car. Here is your intake tube. This is where your mass airflow sensor is going to be installed, and this is where you're going to connect your crankcase ventilation hose. Now, in order to remove the stock components, you're going to want to take off the engine cover, the intake tube assembly, which also has a resonator attached to it, and your intake box where your filter sits, and there's some hardware there that you just remove in order to take the box off of the vehicle. Alright, we're going ahead and start by removing the engine cover. It basically just snaps into place, so you can just pop it off by hand. We'll also need to loosen the worm clamp that connects the intake tube to the throttle body, the crankcase ventilation hose, and the other worm clamp that connects to the intake box. Here we're going to just loosen up the worm clamps. I used a 10mm socket and an impact driver. We're going to disconnect the crankcase ventilation hose from the intake tube. It's just a simple clasp that you can pinch with your hands to loosen. And then the other worm clamp that connects to the intake filter box enclosure. Now here I noticed that the wire harness for the mass airflow sensor is attached to both the box and the intake tube and resonator assembly. So disconnect the mass airflow sensor and disconnect the points where it attaches to both the box and the resonator on the intake tube, and then you'll be able to take the intake tube completely off. Alright, now we're going to remove the top half of the box assembly. It's just two clamps holding the box top half closed. So you'll just unclip it and then pull it off. You'll want to remove your stock intake filter. Mine, it looks like it's about a couple years old. I'm pretty impressed actually with how clean it looks for its age. And to remove the bottom portion of the box, there's going to be three 12mm bolts, two which are inside the box enclosure, and then I didn't realize this until just a moment now that there's the third one is behind the box enclosure. So the third one is going to be behind right here. You'll just take that bolt out as well and the enclosure will come out. Now with the three bolts that you take out, they go through some rubber grommets and metal sleeves. We're going to transfer those parts over to the new Injen intake box enclosure, so that way the box can be properly secured to the vehicle. Alright, now before we install the box, it's a good idea to install the extension to the box assembly, so that way you're not fumbling around with everything on top of the engine trying to put it together. This enclosure will connect to the extension with 4 screws or machine bolts that Injen provides you with. And there's basically to be 2 bolts on each side that connect the enclosure. Alright, one side with the 2 of the bolts fastened to the intake box, and here's the other side. Just make sure you secure those into place. And then next up, we need to remove this upper shroud cover, basically, that sits on the core support. There's going to be a few clips that you'll just want to pop up and remove. You can either use a flathead screwdriver, or in my case I'm using a trim removal tool in order to sort of pop up the center portion of the clip, so that way I can remove them. And then here you're going to no clip side. You'll just want to pop L in order to remove the trim piece. Alright, so basically the extension is going to sit on top of the core support like so. And here's sort of a look on how the air is directed to the filter from the front grille area. Now remember, you're going to want to take those 3 grommets from the stock intake box with the metal sleeves, and you're going to transfer them over to the new intake assembly. And here I'm going to show you the locations on where you install the grommets and the sleeve components. Here on the underside of the box, you're going to have 2 where they sort of sit inside of the box assembly, and a 3rd one on the outside. Alright, now that the grommets and sleeves are in place, you can sort of set the box down, remove the trim piece, and then we're also going to need to install the weather stripping around this portion of the enclosed box assembly. The weather stripping just sort of sits against the passenger front fender area and allows another access point to draw in cold air through the filter. Luckily, the weather stripping that came with the intake system was the cut at the exact length, so I didn't need to do any modifications. Just needed to put it on and around the enclosure portion, and it was a pretty good snug fit. Alright, now that we have the box where we need it to be, you'll want to use a stubby, like a short ratchet with a 12mm socket in order to access those 2 bolts that you're going to need to install that are inside of the box enclosure. That's probably the hardest part of the job because it's not a lot of room in order to get your hands in there to tighten the bolts down, and you can't see what you're doing, so you sort of have to feel where the bolts go in order to get them started and secured to the vehicle. Alright, now that the box is secured to the vehicle, we can go ahead and install our filter. This filter is notched, so basically you'll just insert it into the intake box and then twist it about 90 degrees clockwise so it will lock into place. And then once that's done, now we can go ahead and start putting our intake tube on. You'll want to put a worm clamp around the filter opening and make sure that the worm clamp is loose so you have some wiggle room when you're connecting the intake tube from the filter to the throttle body. And then the coupler right here, you'll want to make sure that you have your worm clamps loose as well. And this coupler only goes on one way. One opening, the diameter fits the throttle body, and the other opening, the diameter fits the intake tube. So just make sure you have your worm clamps in place, put the coupler onto the intake tube, and then you can slide that onto the throttle body, and then also the air filter on the other side where the box is. Alright, now that you have everything in place, you can go ahead and tighten down the worm clamps next to the throttle body, on the intake tube, and next to the air filter and the air filter box enclosure. Alright, don't forget to reconnect your crankcase ventilation hose. Make sure you put that on. And then afterwards, once everything's secure, we'll install the mass airflow sensor. You just need to finish tightening up the worm clamps. Check to make sure everything's secure in place, that nothing's moving around. And now we will go ahead and install the mass airflow sensor. Now the mass airflow sensor has an arrow pointing in one direction. Make sure that arrow is pointing towards the throttle body because that's the direction of airflow from the filter to the engine. Now you'll just want to use a Phillips head screwdriver and install the mass airflow sensor to the intake tube assembly. And you don't have to be too tight with it, just get it snug by hand and you'll be good to go. And then you'll want to go ahead and connect the electrical connector to the mass airflow sensor. And then last but not least, we're going to go ahead and put those retaining clips that we took out before and install them into the air extension piece for the intake system onto the core support assembly. It can get a little tight sometimes, so you may have to be firm with it. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. If you have any questions, again, please leave them down in the comment section. I'll be happy to answer them. If you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe to my channel. I'm still going to be pumping out a lot more videos, mostly with this Toyota Tacoma to begin with, because that's what I've got to work on. But yeah, if you liked it, give me a like. And in the meantime, I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.